What happens when a public feud fuels a moment of unexpected humiliation that spirals into revelations about loyalty, self-worth, and the tangled web of relationships in the limelight? Just recently, a story broke that had everyone's social media feeds buzzing. Cassie Ventura, the multifaceted singer and actress, found herself at the center of a bold showdown on live television. She delivered a moment that not only shocked audiences but sent ripples through celebrity culture, particularly within the inner circle of Sean "Diddy" Combs and his family. Picture this: the glitz and glamour of Hollywood's elite, the red carpets unfurling, flashing cameras capturing every moment. But beneath that dazzling surface lies a tale woven with threads of deception, power struggles, and emotional scars that few are brave enough to confront. Cassie, once the muse of Diddy, had stood on the sidelines for years, waiting in the shadows, yearning for her moment to reclaim her narrative. And that moment on national television was nothing short of her declaration to reclaim her path. It all unfolded during an episode of a popular talk show, the kind of platform that attracts millions of viewers and scrutinizes every word uttered. As cameras panned to Cassie sitting confidently in a designer outfit that screamed self-assurance, the tension was palpable. She was no longer just another face in the crowd. The narrative had shifted. She was here to take control, to chart her own destiny. Little did Diddy's mother, Janice Combs, know that her presence in the audience would set the stage for what would become a contentious and unforgettable exchange. Janice has always been a formidable voice in Diddy's life, a matriarch who seemed to wield her influence with a protective force. Yet, her interference in the lives of her son and Cassie would soon be tested like never before. Here we had two strong women, both defined by their very different relationships with Diddy, standing against the backdrop of an unforgiving public eye. In this high-stakes environment, Cassie's simmering frustrations found their way to the surface, ready to boil over in the glare of popular perception. As the show progressed, the conversation turned to relationships, sunlight piercing through the cloud of awkward tension that had built up in the room. It was an unsettling setup, prompting Cassie to reflect on her journey, years spent entangled in a complex relationship with Diddy. Years spent waiting for validation, and years spent navigating betrayal and self-doubt. It was during this segment that Cassie, who had often taken a back seat to her partner's larger-than-life persona, seized the opportunity to redefine her narrative and regain not just control over her image but her self-worth. "The world hears everything," Cassie began, her voice steady yet layered with raw emotion. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, punctuated by the gasps of an audience that never expected such an outspoken moment from someone who had long remained in silence. And there it was, the specter of vulnerability laid bare, the moment of honesty. In her revelation, Cassie was drawing on what social psychologists term self-disclosure, a powerful tool for building intimacy and connection. In dishing out her truths, Cassie was not merely seeking sympathy, she was showing her strength. But her courage wasn't without a backdrop of tension. As if poised to strike, Janice appeared visibly uncomfortable. Her regal posture seemed to amplify the unease. Every twitch of the audience's gaze pointed toward an impending clash. What unfolded next was a power struggle not just between Cassie and Diddy's mother, but a collision of generational viewpoints, challenges, and the scars of unresolved tensions that had simmered alongside them all. The audience collectively leaned in, on the edge of their seats, as Cassie's expression shifted. Even through the delicate veil of public decorum, it was as if a charged energy crackled between them. Cassie wasn't going to shrink back. This was her moment, and she would seize it unapologetically, shedding the inhibitions that had once held her captive. "Janice," Cassie countered, her voice clear and purposeful, "it's exactly that, complexities, that led me to choose what's best for my life now. I've spent years trying to fit into a mold that was never made for me." However, the real weapon here was perception. Cassie's sheer tenacity defied the expectations often thrust upon women in harsh public narratives. Her statement had a palpable weight, rooted in emotional intelligence and personal journey. Additionally, there's a psychological theory known as the bystander effect, which suggests that individuals witnessing an event often hesitate to act when others are present. In this case, the presence of Janice potentially amplified Cassie's courage. Surrounded by a live audience and millions watching from home, Cassie found her voice against the dual pressures of familial loyalty and public scrutiny. As the back-and-forth volley escalated, the tension within the venue crescendoed. The prior feelings of unease continued to spiral as Janice, determined to keep her son's legacy intact, leaned into her matriarchal persona. It was a bold statement, a glaring reminder that familial ties often complicate matters of the heart even within a fame-soaked facade. Here was a woman exerting dominance, a protective mother eager to stake her claim in the narrative that Cassie was also a vital character in. Interpersonal dynamics were unraveling with raw intensity, echoing what many might experience but seldom dare to share in such public forums. What followed was electrifying. Cassie's next words resonated like a thunderclap. "Janice, this isn't about overshadowing anything. I'm not the villain." The audience erupted in applause, echoing her sentiments as if gathering strength from her authenticity. Inside the studio, Tyler, the host, felt the palpable shift, attempting to mediate yet also reveling in the drama unfolding before him. He'd become a witness to the rich layers of personal experiences, empathy, and the deep-rooted connections facing turmoil. "It sounds like there's a history here," he ventured, choosing his words carefully, inviting vulnerability while avoiding inflaming the discourse. In this moment, Cassie embodied the notion that standing your ground can invoke challenges of vulnerability and strength. She was not simply battling for her moment, she was wrestling with history, confronting feelings of being diminished and trivialized for too long. At that point, Cassie took a deep breath, allowing the tension to settle, and continued. "For years, I feared what the world would think of me. But letting go of that fear has given me power that I didn't believe I had," she admitted, her voice softening as she reflected on the inner transformation she experienced. This compelling moment reflected a universally relatable struggle, self-doubt meeting the fierce resolve that we are all capable of summoning. Cassie invited people to consider resilience in their own lives, challenging them to confront the narratives that so often cage them into silence. Meanwhile, Janice's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing as she digested the sincerity behind Cassie's admission. The psychological dynamic of compassion versus criticism played across her face, wrestling between maternal protectiveness and the stark realization of Cassie's inner strength. Yet, as the baton of emotional discourse changed hands, the air thickened with unresolved tensions lurking beneath the surface of their public personas. Suddenly, Cassie decided to shift her approach. In a masterful display of emotional intelligence, she softened the tone while bearing the weight of her vulnerability. "I loved your son, Janice. He and you meant the world to me. But I lost sight of my own happiness in trying to keep everyone else content." It was in this moment that an unexpected truth unraveled, laying bare the reality of love and sacrifice. Cassie's admission acted as a mirror, compelling both the audience and Janice to confront the complexity of love as a double-edged sword, where attachment can often become a chain that binds rather than liberates. Janice, visibly impacted by Cassie's heartfelt vulnerability, began to grapple with her protective instincts, wrestling with a blend of nostalgia and wisdom gained through experience. "I never wanted to see you hurt, Cassie. I thought I was helping my son, and in turn, helping you," she replied, her tone shifting towards an openness that many in the audience hadn't anticipated. Yet at that very moment, it became evident that barriers of misunderstanding were ready to collapse, and innermost fears stood stark against the ramifications of fragile egos. Would they continue in their defensiveness, or could this serve as a pathway toward understanding? Cassie leaned in, fixing her gaze on Janice. "I know you think you are protecting him, and me, but love is about letting go sometimes." The revelation echoed not just through the studio, but resonated with countless viewers grappling with similar familial dynamics. Therein lies the complexity of relationships, where expectations and desires can sometimes clash in the most unexpected ways. Like a masterful storyteller wielding emotional insight, Cassie unraveled the intricate layers of their experiences, sparking potential pathways toward resolution amidst the tension. Time seemed suspended in the transformative moment, as Cassie and Janice's eyes locked, two women holding fragments of the same heart, both grappling with different narratives. And just as they appeared ready to step forward on the path of healing and understanding, Janice looked at her son's former love with newfound clarity, wrestling with everything that had been said, as if contemplating a crucial realization. Yet, right then and there, the air filled with suspense. Viewers could almost taste the potential for reconciliation, a sea of hope amidst the tension. But before this palpable moment of connection could fully unfold, an unexpected revelation burst through the tension. A text message appeared on Janice's phone, its notification tone glaring and intrusive. Had it been from Diddy himself? Would he interject right at this pivotal moment? Only time would tell how the dynamics would play out. Would this overshadow the progress they had made? Would the veil of his influence be enough to stifle genuine connection? We could almost feel hearts racing in anticipation, waiting to discover whether this bold showing of womanhood would curl back into knee-jerk defensiveness or cultivate an atmosphere of compassion. With everything hanging in the balance, Cassie's unyielding spirit stood as a beacon of hope. In a world where loyalty warps into rivalry and connection dissolves into chaos, her authenticity remained a lifeline, beckoning those watching to redefine their own journeys, one honest conversation at a time. As the screen faded to black, the lingering tension remained suspended, not just as a cliffhanger fueled by unanswered questions, but as recognition that divisions can be bridged when voices rise above the noise, carving pathways to authenticity and understanding. Would the story continue in a direction of healing, or were they destined for another round of defensive posturing and resentment? In the distance, one thing remained clear: the power of truth is undeniable, and in the heart of that moment, it felt like a new beginning awaited. In that charged moment on live television, as the audience held their breath in collective anticipation, the atmosphere shifted once again. Cassie Ventura had just exposed her vulnerability and unleashed her truth. But in the corners of the studio, tension lingered like a storm waiting to break. The unexpected chime of Janice Combs' phone had transformed what could have been an emotional breakthrough into a potential disaster, a disruption that could snap the thin thread binding understanding and resentment. She hesitated, glancing sideways at Cassie, a mixture of incredulity and defensiveness flickering across her features. The audience felt the ripple of disbelief, waiting for an explanation that never seemed to come. In moments like these, the psychology of relationships takes center stage. What happens when the dynamics of love, loyalty, and motherhood collide under the harsh glare of public scrutiny? The complexity of familial bonds colliding with romantic histories is something that resonates with many, yet few dare to openly explore. The truth is, those glistening facades of celebrity often hide deeply entrenched emotional struggles, begging viewers to wonder, how do we navigate our connections in a world that thrives on public opinion? Janice didn't launch into a defense or allow the tension to mount further. Instead, she held herself with the grace of a matriarch as she stood up to take the call, stepping away from the direct confrontation of Cassie's fierce gaze, a subtle move that only deepened the intrigue. Cassie, on the other hand, took a deep breath, her eyes dimming momentarily as she wrestled with the weight of her words and what they meant in the reality they inhabited. What was meant to be a ground-shaking moment was precariously perched on the edge of chaos. In psychological terms, we often refer to cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort experienced when an individual holds two conflicting beliefs or when actions contradict beliefs. Cassie's sincere admission was significant. She had chosen truth over silence, vulnerability over compliance. But in stepping into that spotlight, did she risk creating further friction with Diddy's family, just as the walls were beginning to crumble? Yet when Janice returned, she did so with renewed determination. "That was a quick chat with him," she declared, taking her seat again, perhaps sensing that momentum was lost, yet unwilling to let go of her role in this unfolding drama. "You need to remember that you were part of my son's life at a time when he was still growing into who he is today. As a mother, what I want most is for him to be surrounded by a stable environment." What an interesting claim to make. To protect Diddy by devaluing Cassie's lived experience, And what a testament to the psychological phenomenon of scapegoating, the tendency to blame an individual for problems arising within a group. Cassie's bravery in embracing her own spotlight threatened Janice's control over her son's narrative and rightfully invited the question, who determines the story when it comes to relationships intertwined in such a public arena? Cassie leaned forward, undeterred. Janice, we all play a part in how the story unfolds. I didn't come here to demonize anyone. I came to redefine the narrative that has followed me for years. I loved Diddy deeply, but I can't ignore that depth now. Psychological studies have illustrated how emotional resilience promotes personal growth, often leading individuals to assert themselves in the face of inherited conflicts. Cassie was living proof of this. She radiated clarity, and her willingness to confront pain echoed the bravery many seek yet seldom manifest. Janice, visibly struck by Cassie's unwavering courage, faltered for a brief moment. The confrontation was no longer just about two strong women. It had morphed into a dialogue about the systems of loyalty and the intricate tapestry of love that binds families, partners, and those intertwined in their lives. As Janice's defenses lowered, a flicker of understanding seemed to spark between them. I know my son hasn't always made the best decisions, she admitted, a hint of vulnerability cracking her stoic veneer. He's complicated, and we all make mistakes. But can we really move past it? With each question, Janice conjured the poignant idea of a shared humanity. It was almost as if she began to understand that Cassie's courage didn't steal her light, it could shine within her darkness. There was room for both women to stand strong, united in their experiences. Cassie seized this moment of realization. It takes two to create an atmosphere of chaos, but it equally takes two to create a space of healing. I care for your son. That love has not vanished. Her sincerity echoed through the studio. The audience felt the change in energy shift, drawing breaths in collective anticipation. In that moment, Cassie stepped into a role reminiscent of a social psychologist, painting a new picture, a model of how to engage with conflict in a world that often fuels division. She was inviting Janice and the viewers to consider how both motherhood and love, despite their inherent challenges, can flourish without competition, that nurturing doesn't necessitate suppressed voices. Janice, clearly moved, absorbed Cassie's words. So we try? We take responsibility? The audience watched, riveted. The moment was ripe with potential, not just for a candid exchange of past grievances, but for a future where you could rewrite your narrative, finding strength through acknowledging pain. The shift from confrontation to collaboration hinted at the possibility of healing that lies within shared struggle. Hope filled the air as Cassie nodded. Yes, we can. But just as the emotional crescendo reached its peak, a phone rang out again, cutting through the moment, a conclusive reminder that life could pull the rug from under the most delicate exchanges. It was Janice's phone again, and everyone watched in disbelief as she fumbled for it, glancing down at the screen with an expression that changed her affable demeanor to something pensive. "Excuse me," Janice murmured, taking the call as though enchanted. Crowds leaned in with a blend of confusion and hope, eager to see where the conversation would lead. The audience waited, the tension palpable, with the faded hope of newfound understanding hanging delicately in the air. Cassie, aware of the tension rising once again, turned her gaze from Janice to the camera. "I didn't come here to argue with your family, Janice." Her words lingered, cementing her position within this volatile atmosphere. And as Janice spoke into her phone, her tone shifted again. Silence took hold of the studio momentarily, as Cassie's words resonated through the hearts of viewers, painting a picture of vulnerability that encapsulated not only her journey, but the importance of honest dialogue. Janice hung up, her face barely comprehensible to the audience. "That was giddy," she said again, her voice steady but edged with uncertainty. In a world driven by spectacle, this moment threatened to pivot the narrative once more. Cassie stood there, the audience consuming the tableau before them. Questions hung thick in the air. Would she take this opportunity, or would she prioritize the budding understanding she was forming with Janice? Would this conversation lead to closure or chaos? Cassie's heart raced as she weighed the potential of this conversation against the emotional momentum of her current engagement with Janice. Was it time to dive headfirst back into the storm that was Diddy? The memories, both cherished and painful, ceaselessly flooding back like an unstoppable tide. As many viewers pondered whether Cassie would take that leap into an emotionally charged reunion, they sensed that something monumental loomed behind the veil of proximity and relationship dynamics. Janice quietly watched her facial expressions shift, caught between the precariousness of the moment and the desire for healing. In psychological terms, she was a part of witnessing the window of opportunity, a space where significant, often life-altering decisions lie. Would Cassie choose the path that could lead towards resolution? Change often requires confronting unresolved conflicts, pushing through storms to finally emerge into the light. The clock's rhythm resonated within the lives of two women, straddling the delicate line between hope and hesitation. What could lie ahead? Was Cassie ready to embrace the complexities once more, or had she bravely set forth on a path of independence beyond Diddy? There it was, the critical moment filled with unexpressed tension and a question lying at the heart of it all. What happens when the past collides with the potential of reconciliation, leaving both mothers and lovers standing on the precipice of transformation? As the screen faded to black, viewers were left suspended in anticipation, reflecting on the myriad ways relationships can unravel and mend, drawing daring contrasts between heartbreak and healing. In the realm of love, loyalty, and personal power, the story suspended here only underscores one enduring truth. Our narratives are often less about the relationships themselves and more about the resilience forged in their shadows. And so, as Cassie took a breath, the world could only wait for the unfolding drama that would define her next steps, the humbling reminder that every moment carries the potential for decisive change at its core. What happens when vulnerability turns into a weapon and familial ties clamp like a vice? On that fateful day of the live broadcast, Cassie Ventura stood at the crossroads of her identity, poised, powerful, and ready to expose the facades that had shrouded her life for years. With Diddy's mother, Janice Combs, in the audience, the stage was set for an explosive confrontation that left no room for half-truths or sugar-coated realities. Imagine the tension that crackled in the studio as Cassie articulated her experience. Her words, laden with emotional resonance, burst forth against a backdrop of shifting allegiances and hidden scars. This was more than mere confrontation. It was a moment steeped in the psychological complexity of relationships, challenging the stereotypes of motherhood and emotional support. As the camera zoomed in, Cassie's gaze pierced straight through the screen. "You're right, Janice." With that one statement, she had unlocked a door to a segment of her life marked by pain. The audience felt that wake. In their hearts, they identified themselves with Cassie, who hasn't wrestled with the intricacies of love, who hasn't craved validation from those in positions of power, only to discover that such validation was often given conditionally. Psychologically, we know this from the concept of dependency theory, the idea that our emotional connections can often result in an imbalance, where one party's need for acceptance overshadows another's autonomy. For years, Cassie had existed within the gravitational pull of Diddy's monumental presence, a celebrity in her own right, yet often overshadowed by her partner's luminous aura. The relational dynamics at play were nothing short of complex. A sense of betrayal echoed through her confession, highlighting unreciprocated support and an overarching reminder of the sacrifices she made. Cassie wasn't just speaking for herself. She was tapping into the collective consciousness of women everywhere who felt unheard, marginalized, or underappreciated. And right there on that show, Cassie took the brave step forward to reclaim her story, standing what felt like a mile high above the shadows of doubt that had long haunted her. She wasn't screaming for attention, she was commanding it. Her boldness in claiming her voice served as a catalyst for introspection. Cassie continued, her tone unwavering. "My worth is not intertwined solely with Diddy." Each word resonated, like a beautiful note in a symphony, striking a chord with anyone who had ever been stifled by another's expectations. Here, Cassie had deftly illuminated the manifestation of psychological reactance, a common response to perceived threats toward an established identity. Janice's expectations for her son and Cassie's persistence in carving out space for herself created friction, yet Cassie understood that her reaction could either entrench her in silence or empower her to take control. Janice, sitting in the audience, squirmed as Cassie laid her heart bare. For a moment, vulnerability belied the tension that lay between them. She had stepped into the light, illuminated by her truths and unwavering strength. The psychology behind Cassie's assertiveness speaks volumes. Her readiness to name her suffering transformed her story into a mirror, reflecting the complexities of relationships. She was embodying the narrative of self-advocacy, showing the audience that acknowledging pain could lead to unexpected healing. Yet, could that transformation extend beyond that stage, that very moment? The audience leaned in, intrigued, hungry for the unfolding of this emotional drama. Cassie and Janice's dynamic was symbolic of a broader conflict waged between societal expectations and personal desires. Everyone was on the edge of their seats, holding their breath in disbelief as they straddled the line between motherly concern and the liberation of suppressed voices. Suddenly, Janice, realizing the impact of Cassie's words, spoke up. "But what about family? What about loyalty?" Her voice trembled with a blend of emotion, showcasing the audacity of her role torn between motherhood and the realization that the winds of change often sweep through even the most protective instincts. This was Janice's call for connection, utilizing the very fabric of familial bonds to shield her perspective and evidence of the complexities in maternal attachment. But Cassie was not prepared to let this redefine her stance. "Loyalty, Janice, deserves to go both ways." The familiar yet profound exchange made waves. Both women navigated the emotional landscape like skilled dancers, engaged in a high-stakes tango. Each spin, each step brought them closer to understanding, yet also risked unraveling the tensions that had come to define their relationship. Cassie's piercing honesty was a radical display of self-awareness, fueled by years of introspection. She had transcended the victimhood that society often assigns to women in her position. That's the transformative power of speaking one's truth. When you own your narrative, it empowers you to take agency over your life. "Your son's love for me did not negate my journey to self-love. It almost suffocated it," Cassie asserted, her gaze unwavering. This journey of self-rediscovery she spoke about was one that many can relate to. Countless individuals often find themselves lost within someone else's story, whether it be a partner, friend, or even family member. The thirst for acceptance can overshadow the need for personal growth, leading to conflict when attempting to break free. As Cassie poured her heart out, Janice's initial defenses began to crumble. The walls erected around loving protection now seemed to act as barriers to understanding. This is a classic illustration of how emotional intimacy can sometimes provoke the very defensiveness meant to shield relationships. In this vulnerable exchange, the potential for connection began to unfurl between them, but Cassie wouldn't let her guard down entirely. Her tone softened momentarily, the acceptance cradling her vulnerability lightly, yet she pressed on. "But I won't be an afterthought in anyone's story." The audience, caught in a whirlwind of emotions, could feel the electricity in the room as the two women grappled with years' worth of buried grievances. Would they let those grievances explode like fireworks, burning brightly for all to see, or would they dismantle the barriers that had divided them? Janice, now visibly shaken by the intensity of this discussion, hesitated. But how do we heal from this? Her plea mingled frustration and a desperate wish to connect. Climbing the emotional ladder, like someone reaching for hope while struggling to regain footing. Cassie took the opportunity to guide them further into this emotional territory. Healing is not linear, and it starts with all of us being honest. We need open conversations, Janice, not just touch-and-go discussions. In this moment, Cassie wasn't just speaking for herself. She embodied the voice of a generation advocating for deeper conversations about mental health, vulnerability, and the complexity of love. The audience erupted in applause, the sound reverberating off the walls, affirming the unfiltered authenticity wrought from this scene. In a society that often shies away from discussing struggles, Cassie's voice rang as a clarion call. She was shattering barriers and forging connections with every word. Yet even amidst that collective roar, a nagging feeling emerged. Would the looming presence of Diddy weave back into this fraught narrative? Would the man who often held the gavel return to threaten whatever establishment Cassie and Janice had begun to build? The question hung, heavy in the air, and just as Cassie turned to acknowledge the crowd, Janice once more displayed a moment of hesitation. She knew that her son, while absent, could still infiltrate their fledgling bond. "You know, Diddy respects loyalty above all else," she quieted, a sharpness creeping into her voice. That thread of tension twisted again, while Cassie had made strides to dismantle her feelings of inferiority. What would happen when Diddy entered the scene? As if on cue, images of Diddy crowded Cassie's mind, his commanding presence battling against her sense of self. The audience felt the swell of nerves slink back, wondering if the tide was about to shift once more. Cassie's breath caught, and she closed her eyes momentarily. "Janice," she said, her voice low, "what does that loyalty look like?" The question hung in the air like a spell. By asking this, she invited Janice to engage in a deeper inquiry of self. The psychological implications were heftier than any drama this audience had seen. In shifting the perspective, Cassie offered Janice a lifeline, empowering her to navigate the tricky waters of emotional authenticity. Would Janice take it? Would she choose to explore her own loyalty to Diddy in light of the pain Cassie had so vulnerably acknowledged? The ramifications of this discussion loomed larger than both women could have fathomed. As the scene unfolded, viewers at home felt a magnetic pull, engaging them deeper into the complexities woven through their shared lives. Perhaps within this tapestry lay the remnants of healing waiting to flourish, like wildflowers emerging through cracks in the pavement. But moments later, just when it seemed both women were reaching an understanding, an unanticipated notification buzzed from Janice's phone. It was Diddy calling directly, without prior notice. The crowd gasped collectively, a palpable anticipation vibrating through the room. The stakes had risen dramatically. Cassie asked, her voice steady yet filled with a hint of concern that reflected not only her own uncertainties, but the collective fear lingering in the air. Would this be another fractal moment veering away from the path to mutual understanding? Would the weight of Diddy's presence overshadow this fragile bond they were creating? The studio's lights dimmed slightly. Cameras turned to both women, signifying the tension reverberating through the audience. All eyes were on Janice, who seemed to hold the ultimate trump card, balancing maternal instinct with the inevitable arrival of her son's perspective. Janice asked aloud, breaking the weighty silence. She was torn. If she accepted the call, would it fracture the hard-earned bridge bridging old wounds? Or would it bring a salve to a festering history? In this moment, everyone felt the pulse of possibility, one that could lead to healing or detonation. The choice belonged solely to Janice. The clock was ticking. Her heartbeat echoed not just through her own chest, but reverberated as a collective heartbeat, urging for resolution. As Janice pondered the crossroads before her, it became evident that the narrative was far from over. With each passing second,